Good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to see a packed house tonight. Thank you all so much for coming out. My name is Megan Radecki. It's my pleasure to serve as your director here at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. And on behalf of our team in Grand Valley State University, we want to welcome you to our event tonight, Our American Allies, the Future of NATO and U.S. Power. We have a lot of wonderful guests here, Hauenstein Center members, faculty, staff, our Cook Leadership Academy students from Grand Valley, and community members, and we're certainly happy to see you all. I do want to give a special shout out to someone who isn't here tonight. Our public programming manager at the Hauenstein Center is our colleague, Kaylor Sweeney. Kaylor is the mastermind behind all of these programs, and he and his family just welcomed a new addition to their family last week, a little early. So he was looking forward to being here tonight, but he is home with a snuggly little baby, so we wish them all well. But we certainly want to give Kaylor a round of applause for putting together this great program. As many of you know, the mission of the Hauenstein Center is to raise a community of ethical and effective leaders for the 21st century. We do this as inspired by the life and legacy of our own Colonel Ralph Hauenstein, who you can see on these lovely banners up here. Ralph was devoted to public service. He was devoted to free enterprise. He was devoted to making the world a better place, and he did that in many different ways. And part of the way that we embody his legacy is by bringing forth thought, discussion, and dialogue about the important pressing issues of the day and what we all collectively can do about them. This event is also part of our Progressive Conservative Summit, which we hold once a year. And we find that it's really important, especially these days, to model what it means to have values from different sides of the spectrum and how we can talk about them civilly, have dialogue, and figure out a best course of action to move forward. So we thank you for coming here in the spirit of that tonight. Tonight's topic is one that tracks well with our programming season. Some of you were with us for the kickoff this year, which was with Garrett Graff, talking about the greatest generation. I think it's very fitting that we now follow up with this event about NATO, which certainly came on the heels and because of the sacrifice of that greatest generation. The North Atlantic Treaty was signed on April 4, 1949, following the end of World War II, a war that our very own Ralph Hauenstein helped to end. It was determined that only a truly transatlantic security agreement could deter Soviet aggression while simultaneously preventing the revival of European militarism and laying the groundwork for political integration. In the treaty's renowned Article 5, the new allies agreed an armed attack against one or more of them shall be considered an attack against them all, and that following such an attack, each ally would take such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force in response. This storied alliance is now 75 years old, and we're privileged to have the two most recent U.S. ambassadors to NATO, as well as an expert on Arthur Vandenberg, in our midst tonight to shed some light on its strategy and relevance in the world today. To help me introduce our panelists and also share about leadership closer to home, allow me to introduce one of our Cook Leadership Academy lead fellows, Grace Loftus. Grace is a senior at Grand Valley State University and is pursuing a double major in political science and international business with a specialization in law. As a lead fellow in her second year of the Cook Leadership Academy, she is passionate about international relations and law. Her involvement includes participating in the 2025 UN Commission on the Status of Women and competing at the national level for GVSU's Model Arab League. In a few weeks, Grace will also be attending the United Nations Institute for Training and Research's International Research Conference in Brussels, which will focus on the goals related to peace building. As you might imagine, with her diverse background, Grace aspires to a career in diplomacy and international law, and I'm so excited to introduce her to you tonight. Grace.
Thank you very much. As I've had the privilege of serving as a lead fellow for the Cook Leadership Academy, I've had the opportunity to meditate on questions of what it means to be a leader and how I want to show up in my leadership. For me, this has meant examining what it means to be a leader in the middle. It can be very tempting to be the person at the front of the room or at the head of the table. But I have realized that that kind of leadership is not the kind that I need to develop the most. The leadership that I have found admirable and that I have found most hopeful is that shows up in the middle. So what do these leaders look like? Those who lead from the middle are the leaders we encounter that feel like glue. A leader in the middle will bring you in, they will lead alongside of you, and they will help build the social infrastructure that's needed for trust and for consensus building. They connect people that would not have otherwise collaborated. They translate differences, and they are the leaders who build strong alliances and networks. They are the conduits for common ground. I'm so interested in this kind of leadership because this kind of leadership is where we will find the peacemakers. And that is the promise of leading from the middle. It's leadership that builds peace instead of reinforcing it. It's leadership that turns negotiation into consensus and disagreement into direction. I had the fortune of seeing both sides of the spectrum at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women this past March. Some delegates simply rattled off their pre-written speeches, which did not go touched by what the others had said before them. They spoke at the room rather than to it, and in doing so, they often ended up standing alone in their objectives. But the delegates who listened, who acknowledged another's concerns, who drew connections between the objectives of each nation, those were the delegates for whom the room stood still. And because of their willingness to be catalysts for connection, other delegates were not only more willing to listen, but they were more willing to interact with what one another had said, and solutions finally began to develop. These leaders are the leaders who are willing to be the glue. Of course, there will not always be a clear middle ground, and finding consensus and solutions that meet the most important needs without erasing nuance can feel like walking in a minefield. But it is necessary work because the alternative is deep ideological division, costly miscommunication, and institutional fracture. We need our leaders in the middle. We need them in the middle of our institutions, of our government. We need them at the crux of our alliances. We need the translators who turn difference into understanding and who are willing to occupy that difficult space in the middle. As I finish my time at the Cook Leadership Academy, I will continue to seek out and learn from the leaders in the middle. And as I look ahead at my own path in law and in diplomacy, I know I can become one of those leaders, a leader who can build trust, create connection, and be the glue. My name is Grace Loftus, and I am a leader. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of introducing our guests for the evening. We have Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison, who served as the U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO from 2017 to 2021 during the first Trump administration, shaping U.S. strategy towards Russia, China, and beyond. As a U.S. Senator from Texas, 1993 to 2013, she held leadership roles and gained deep NATO expertise through her work on the Senate Armed Services and Appropriations Committees. She also chaired the board of visitors at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and led the Military Construction Subcommittee. Prior to her ambassadorship, she was an attorney at Bracewell LLP, an internationally known law firm, and held positions in the Texas House as state treasurer and vice chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. The Dallas Convention Center was renamed in her honor, the first major U.S. convention center to be named for a woman. A published author of 3 books on pioneering women, she holds degrees from the University of Texas and resides in Dallas. We also have Ambassador Julianne Smith. She is a seasoned national security expert with over 20 years of expertise in the U.S. and European defense policy. transatlantic relations, and global security. She served as U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO in 2021 through 2024 during the Biden administration. She led efforts to support Ukraine, integrate China into NATO's strategic concept, and finalize Finland and Sweden's accession into the alliance. During the Obama administration, she was acting national security advisor to Vice President Biden and previously directed European and NATO policy in the Department of Defense. Smith has held senior roles at leading think tanks, publishing widely on transatlantic strategy, Russia, and China. She is fluent in French and German and has held multiple fellowships in Berlin and received numerous honors, including awards from Sweden, Germany, and the US State Department. And we have our moderator for tonight's conversation, Hank Meyer, Executive Chairman of Meyer Incorporated, a Grand Rapids-based retailer with 270 supercenters across 6 Midwestern states. He began working in the family business at age 11 as a grocery clerk and later returned to advertising department after graduating from the University of Michigan and serving as a newspaper editor. An author of 2 biographies, Meyer has served as vice chairman of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation and sits on several boards, including Food Marketing Institute, National Constitution Center, and the University of Michigan's Ford School. He's also a trustee of the Frederick Meyer Gardens Foundation and the Kettering Foundation, the Henry Ford Museum, and the Mackinac Island State Parks Commission. Please join me in welcoming our speakers for tonight.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm feeling very privileged to be here with our 2 distinguished guests. And before we get started, if you didn't have a chance to pick up a card as you came in, the Hauenstein Center team can come through the aisle if anyone raises their hand, because we would welcome questions from the audience and love to have them. They'll be compiled, and I see them coming around right here. As we get started, and welcome, Madam Ambassadors, you both in successive administrations assumed an assignment that is really, I think of as unique in American diplomacy. It's not to another sovereign nation as an envoy from one country to another, but to an organization of states, sovereign states operating as a military alliance. And one of you spent an early career in Defense and State Department, and the other is a distinguished senator from Texas and other earlier political roles. I wonder if each of you could take a minute just to talk a little bit about the path that brought you to Brussels. Kay, would you like to start?
I'd be happy to. I got a call from the transition team from the Trump administration to ask if I would like to be an ambassador. And I said, no, not really. And so I started thinking about it. And about 2 weeks later, I just asked my son, who was in the 9th grade at the time, how he would feel about going to high school in Europe. And he said, Mom, could we do that? And I said, well, maybe. And so that's when I started really thinking about it. And when I called back, I said there were just a couple of things I would do. And one was NATO, because I had been visiting NATO as a senator. I had been on the Armed Services Committee and West Point, of course, as was mentioned. And I was so pro-NATO, and I thought it was such an important alliance for America to lead. And so it was very quick after that. They called back and said, yes, NATO, get ready. And I was so happy to do it, but I never thought about being an ambassador. And it was kind of a joke at NATO because sometimes diplomats use so many adjectives that I'm not sure what they're really saying. And so I said, give it to me in Senate speak, please. So, it was really fun, and I loved it, and I loved my colleagues. They are the most fabulous representatives of their country. And I'm so glad I just took a flyer, really not thinking that it would ever be something I would remember. And it made an impact on my life. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I had previously in the Obama administration, as the introduction noted, worked with then Vice President Biden. So I had a working relationship with him. And when he decided to run for president, I joined the transition team, which is a group of people that essentially works post-election until inauguration to help the new team get ready to come into government. And I had indicated to the transition team that I was interested in serving in government again and returning. The word that came down from on high was, Julie, we'd like to send you to the White House again. And I have two boys, and I remember what it was like being at the White House. I had remembered years prior how hard it was from a family perspective. So I said, please don't put me at the White House because I really need more balance in my life. I want to see my children on occasion. And so they said, okay, we'll come back to you. Oh, poor Kay. I know she's battling a cold, but yeah, okay. Then my phone rang and they said, we have a role for you at the State Department. And I said, that sounds lovely, but is there anything overseas? We had been overseas once as a family. My husband and I had an opportunity to move to Berlin when the boys were younger, and it was a very positive experience. And they said, well, we'll see. And so it went a little quiet, and I just kept working on the transition. And then I was just driving one day in the car, and a call came through from an unknown number. Clicked on the car speaker, and they said, please hold for the president. And president-elect. And pulled over, said, uh-oh, might drive off the road. And he said, Julie, we've got it. We're going to send you to NATO. And I was elated and said, oh my goodness, this is perfect. I'm the NATO nerd. I call myself that all the time. I love the alliance. I've worked on the alliance. I've worked on Europe. It would be a great honor. And we had a short conversation, and I looked over and my son was with me and he was in tears. And just to tell you that story, not to make you feel bad, it's a happy ending. But just to say, these decisions are hard. They're hard. Kay spoke with her son, trying to balance whether or not it would work for the family. My son was nervous about going back overseas. He was in middle school, a little bit harder time. And so we came home and my husband said, what's going on? And I said, I'll talk to you later. So like for the first couple hours, my husband didn't even know we were moving to Brussels. Anyways, we went with our two boys. They had a glorious time and they cried to move back to the United States. So all to say, they had a wonderful, wonderful time. Like Kay, it was just the opportunity of a lifetime. It is a very unique posting because you sit at a big round table with all of the allies at NATO every day. You get to know your colleagues, the other ambassadors, very well, and sometimes there's sword fighting, but it's really a unique opportunity and one that I wouldn't have traded for the world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the Senate resolution that enabled American participation in a new security organization after World War II was typed out in Arthur Vandenberg's apartment by Arthur Vandenberg at the Wardman Park Hotel in Washington. And that was, gosh, more than 75 years ago. Is the Transatlantic Alliance still the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy as we confront the rise of China and talk about transitioning to Indo-Pacific concerns?
Yeah, do you want to start? And why don't we?
I'm going to try.
Are you okay? Okay.
I'm going to try because I believe that it is the cornerstone, but it's because NATO is evolving. The reason it is the longest serving military political alliance in the history of the world is because it has adapted to the needs and the changes. And I believe when I was there is when the 10-year strategic review came out from the Department of Defense from the United States. And it said, this is 2019, it said, China is the potential adversary of the next decade. And that meant, because of NATO, we would have to start deterring against that potential rivalry. And that was such a surprise to Europeans and to me too, because we hadn't had that kind of intel that it was really bubbling up, although you began to see it very quickly with the Belt and Road Initiative and the adversarial buildup of defenses. So I think that NATO is the cornerstone, and it's because we are bringing together now 32 allies. It was 30 when I was there, 32 now, thanks to Vladimir Putin. And we've also, and this is something people don't really think about, we have 44 partners of NATO. And that is the economic alliance. 44 partners, including the Asia Pacific partners that are now coming into our summits, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. So that's a huge increase in what we're saying now is we're the umbrella of security for all of our countries. And that means we want the Asia Pacific partners that are like-minded and certainly have determined that China is a potential adversary, that we would come in together and start doing more cooperation, more training, more sharing of information. And I think we also have in those 44 partners Middle Eastern countries. They're not democracies, but they do want to be part of the West, not part of Russia or China or Iran. And so we have adapted in a way that NATO is, in my view, the center point of the foreign policy and security of all of our people. And because the US is the leader of NATO, and there can be no, we'll talk more about that, I know, but because we are the leader, it means that we have the ability to assess a risk and then start deterring it against that risk, and that we would bring our European allies and partners in to make NATO the effective security umbrella for really the Western civilization.
This is actually a really interesting example of handing off a baton. So when Kay was ambassador, as she just noted, she was the first US ambassador that really pushed the NATO alliance to care more about China. The Europeans were saying, you know, this is a Euro-Atlantic alliance. Are you suggesting that we send, you know, troops into Asia? But that wasn't what it was about. It was understanding that China posed a threat even in Europe and was showing up. So Kay did all of this legwork. She and her team worked tirelessly to move China into a NATO discussion. And then her tenure came to an end, and I showed up, and they said, listen, it was in many ways the same team, about 200 to 250 people working in the US mission at NATO. And they said, we just finished under Kay's leadership of doing all of this good work. We're doing more than ever before on the Indo-Pacific and China. Now let's take it to another level. And we said, hey, the alliance is about to rewrite the strategic concept. This is kind of the mission statement for the alliance. And about once a decade, the alliance redrafts it. And so we said, what if we put China into NATO's strategic concept? But we were only able to get that done, and we did it in 2022, because of all the good work that Kay did. So this is a great example, two two US administrations, two very different presidents who saw the world differently, no doubt, but Kay and I shared that common project. We decided that we had to get the alliance to wake up and understand China was already in Europe. Cyber attacks, economic coercion, disinformation campaigns. China was trying to drive a wedge between Europe and the United States. It was creeping into critical infrastructure and ports in Europe. And so because of the work of two, successive U.S. administration, now the alliance, as Kay noted, is evolving, is adapting to focus on threats in the Indo-Pacific, and not just land, air, and sea. Those are the domains where the alliance has worked for 75 years. But now the alliance thinks about space and cybersecurity, where China plays a really active role. So I was happy to grab the baton from Kay, and now Matt Whitaker is in the chair. Kay and I are both counseling him to see what more he can do to take that baton forward. And that, I think, is one of the success stories of U.S. principals, ambassadors that just want to get good work done and can build off the good work of their predecessors.
Well, and you both mentioned the expansion of NATO, and obviously Sweden and Finland were incredible additions recently, but earlier than that, the addition of the Baltic states has been viewed by some as an overreach of NATO that may have provoked Russian antagonism and suspicion. Was the earlier expansion of NATO a good idea?
I was in the Senate when that came up, and it was a real debate. And there were two sides that were totally correct in what they were thinking, but we all had questions about whether expanding would take the eye off the ball, but also be harder to manage. And so it was tough, but I ended up voting for it because I thought, if there is going to be a menacing Russia, we need to have a whole lot more buildup in these Eastern European countries than they had. There are certain parameters that are required for NATO membership. You have to have a military, you have to have a rule of law, democracy, of course, and you have to have human rights. All of the things were there with the Eastern Europeans, but you had to think, where is it going to be safer for Europe as a whole? Because Vladimir Putin wasn't there when that decision was made, but he was rising, and there's no question, because our military, Julie's military people know and said that Vladimir Putin is determined to recreate the Soviet Union. That he believes that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the worst thing that ever happened in the history of Russia, and he wants to rebuild it as his legacy. So I now believe that it was such a right decision, because the militaries were building up, the democracies were becoming more resilient, they were having their ups and downs, but they were getting through it. If we hadn't done that, I think those countries would have been gone so much earlier. And I think the fact that we took that leap and then helped them build those democracies, helped them build the militaries, is why Putin is very careful not to attack a NATO country. So he goes to Georgia and he goes to Ukraine because he knows the consequences. We didn't, by the Russian republics that came in, the Eastern Europeans now, it wasn't, we didn't ask them to join NATO. They came to NATO's door and said, we want to be in NATO. And Putin knows that we weren't seeking them coming into NATO, and that we are a defense operation, not an offensive one. He knows that. His goal is to rebuild the Soviet Union, and he's using all of these, just like he's doing with Ukraine. He is saying ridiculous things like, oh, well, I'm trying to protect the Russian people in Ukraine because there are Nazis there, and President Zelensky's a Nazi. He's Jewish, good Lord. I mean, you know, how could you be so bold as to say something so stupid out in public? So I think, bottom line to your question, it was a very good thing that we did that. And now I think because we are adapting more, we are bringing in those Asia-Pacific partners that are also part of what we're going to need if we have a really adversarial situation with China, which we hope that we can deter against, and everyone will be able to live comfortably.
Yeah, on enlargement, I'm completely with Kay. I mean, I think we fundamentally believe in a world in which nations get to choose the alliances that they join. And nations should have that option. That's part of what exists in the UN Charter. And so all of those countries that knocked on the door of the alliance, they had the right to do that. We didn't go seeking them, as Kay noted, but they decided that for their own security and for their development towards Western democracies, it nudged them on a path that made them secure and made their economies prosper. And so they sought NATO membership. And I think the debate that we had as a nation was one that was stuck between, will these nations be security providers or will they be security consumers? And I think those that opposed NATO enlargement in any of its rounds said repeatedly, well, they'll just consume security, they won't provide it. But in truth, these member states, I mean, as a percentage of GDP, they've given more to Ukraine than the United States has. Poland is spending more than 4% of its GDP on defense. It's about to go to 5%. All the allies have promised that they're going to do that, but Poland is actually delivering. All the weapons that went to Ukraine routed through Poland through what's called the hub. They protected that. They ensured the safety of those transfers. They absorbed millions of Ukrainian refugees. So in my mind, the debate about security consumer versus security provider, I mean, it's kind of overtaken by events and by reality. Those countries have shown that they can step up, that they can be active members of the alliance, that they can host US troops and pay host nation support that makes it more affordable for the United States to have troops positioned abroad. So in the big picture, I think absorbing those countries was 100% the right thing to do. They do provide for security for the alliance. They bring innovation, they bring ideas, they bring world-class militaries. And Sweden and Finland, as soon as they walked through the door about 3 years ago, those two just showed up on the scene and were making active contributions as well.
As you talked earlier about the growing international role of NATO, having that expansiveness would be the way to welcome other countries to ally themselves with NATO in a way that had it chosen to be a static situation, that might not have been so receptive.
Yeah.
So then the question, and a friend in the audience was asking earlier, is it ever practical to think about Ukraine joining NATO? Right now, that's a bargaining chip in potential negotiations.
Well, I go back to the premise. Nations should be able to determine. So there's two actors in the decision. Does the country itself want to join the alliance? And President Zelensky has wavered on this. When the war first started, there were negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and Zelensky said, I will consider neutrality to end the war, in which case Ukraine would not join the NATO alliance. We supported that. We said, That's your decision. We're not going to force your hand on NATO membership. That's your sovereign decision. But then the alliance has to vote on it, and you have to have all 32 nations say yes. You'll remember with Sweden and Finland, we had 2 countries that initially said no. Turkey and Hungary said, we're not interested in bringing Sweden and Finland into the alliance. We have some real concerns, and we worked through that over the course of about 2 years, and we got them to yes. But so there's 2 actors here, the country and the alliance, but Putin always thinks he's the third actor, that he gets a voice or a veto or a vote. And my point here is that Russia has no voice, no veto, no vote on membership. He'd like to see membership go away. Before the war started, a Russian delegation came into NATO on January 12, 2022, met with us at NATO for 4 hours. 4 hours we'll never get back. And tried for 4 long hours to convince the alliance to get rid of NATO enlargement. And the answer that came from every country around the table, we were 30 then, was absolutely not. We'll talk to you about not starting a war in Ukraine. We'll talk to you about arms control. We'll talk to you about your partnership with the NATO alliance. But under no circumstances will we discuss enlargement. That is a question for Ukraine and for the alliance. Right now, Ukraine isn't in a position to join the alliance because it's in the middle of a war, which would mean NATO would immediately go to war if they were members of the alliance. And there isn't consensus across the alliance. 32 nations do not agree. But could this be possible someday? Which is the question. I think yes. I think Ukraine could be a member of the alliance. And you know what? It's the largest military in Europe right now after Russia, and it has more experience than all of the NATO allies put together, because they have fought Russia for 3 years, coming up on 4, and they know more about Russian forces than all of us put together in the alliance. So I think there's a world in which, if Ukraine wanted to go that route and they didn't negotiate it away, which they may, and if the alliance could get all 32 nations to yes, I could envision it happening.
I agree. I think that they have earned it if they want it. And I think they have been the most heroic people fighting Goliath. And I think that they will have to meet all the standards. The reason that they hadn't become a member earlier was 2 things. They had a security agreement from both the US and Russia when they gave up their nuclear weapons. And so really, we do owe them some support from our word that we did give them. Russia, you know, that's another one of Putin's sort of dismisses. That was his word. But the other thing is, though, they were not ready. Their democracy was not resilient, and there was corruption. And now I think there will be a new country, and it will be with the values that have been created by the heroism of that country. And if, as Julie said, they could negotiate this away for getting the war stopped, I hope that they don't. I hope that it is something that they will be able to grow into, because I do think that they be a great asset with the knowledge that they have now with the technology of modern warfare. And Julie is right. They are better than any European military right now on the continent. And I think that they would be major players.
Thank you. One of the things that we talk about sometimes is the increasing debate within the U.S. about the international order that had held for decades after World War II, coming under pressure, and can it be sustained? Can we sustain our global commitments given the rise of domestic polarization and fiscal pressures that are always going to be there, but that are intensifying?
I'll say that this is one thing that a lot of people don't look at and see, but right now, the people are, by large majority, pro-NATO and pro-America being the leader of the free world. And you see it in Congress. Congress has, the United States Senate, which is fighting about everything right now and is causing the government shutdown, 85 members out of 100 have signed a bill that will put sanctions on Russia, secondary sanctions on Russia. Everyone, 85 are willing to say we should be on the right side of this. And in the House, it's the same. It's like 85-15. So the representatives of the people are saying that we should be the leader of the security alliance of NATO. And with the expansions in the designation of our strategic potential enemies, that we are for this move forward. So I think the people are more there than comes out, because the ones who talk the most seem to be the loudest protesters of American involvement in foreign affairs. And I want to give an anecdote of one of my friends who was a 4-star in the military, and he was asked. He was in this program, and the audience, one in the audience said, "Well, America can't be the world's policeman," and he said, "Yeah, they can. They can." And I would ask the question of anyone who says America can't be the leader of the free world, who would you have lead the free world? There would be a leader. Who would it be if it's not America? America is the only country in the world that will assess a risk and then deter against it at any cost, because we are going to protect our people. Now we have an alliance that is with us on that. And we have partners that want to be in that alliance. They would not, you wouldn't get 10 votes for any other country in our partnerships and alliances. Only America is looked to by the Europeans and by the Asia Pacific potential partners. It is America. We need to keep that mantle, and it is in our interest to do so, because we're going to look out for our own people. We're going to make sure America is protected. And we also are going to be the innovators of the equipment and the weapons and the assets that we need to be the strongest country in an alliance of security. We'll be the technology innovators. Only China will be our competitor in that. So we do need to be that leader and take that mantle and know that it is in our benefit and our people's benefit to be that leader.
I mean, Kay really nailed it. It's absolutely 100% correct that the United States does have some unique attributes, and the way in which we can build coalitions on the fly to address a variety of challenges is really unmatched anywhere else in the world. I mean, you think about Ukraine, we put together 50 nations overnight to support Ukraine, and Secretary Austin, our former Secretary of Defense, met with those 50 countries every month for 3 years to ensure that they would continue to push assistance to Ukraine. Would they have done that on their own? I'm not so sure. Without him continually badgering them, send more, a little less of this, a little more here, we need more air defense, this month it's ammunition, I know you, Germany, could do more of this, I know you, Spain, could do more of that. And that is a unique attribute. But I also understand that there are a lot of Americans out there questioning at what cost does this come to the United States. We have a country that needs a lot of resources here at home. We have a lot of domestic challenges. We have immense polarization. I do hear young people more and more questioning, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to provide this leadership? The younger generation, they don't have the reference point to World War II and what we've built up over 80 years. They don't understand the investments that we've made in international trade, in economics, in our bilateral, multilateral, institutional relationships around the world. And I felt it 20 years ago, and I feel it's much more acute now. I do think Kay's right that the majority of members in the House and the Senate fundamentally understand why an alliance like NATO matters. But I mean, there are other aspects of American leadership, development assistance. We've completely eliminated USAID. And to Kay's point, you know who has shown up around the world to fill that gap? China. And so we do have to ask ourselves, if we don't continue to play this leadership role, which serves our interests, it is not a charity project, it serves US interests over and over again, but if we don't show up, if we don't maintain these allied relationships, if we don't lead in the NATO alliance, someone else will, and we have to ask ourselves how comfortable we'd be with, if countries in the world can look to China or the United States, what if they start shifting towards China? What does that mean for us as a country? So in my mind, I feel like we're turning the page on the last 80 years. And I don't know what's going to come next. I hope it's just another form of US leadership and us committing to international relationships, but it does feel like we're at the bit of a bookend of, you know, the end of World War II to 2025. And I'm not sure what's coming, but I think we have to pull together to remind each other that if the US doesn't lead in some capacity, China will.
And I think on that note, NATO has been so durable, but if you could redesign the transatlantic alliance for today's world, what would you keep and what would you change? You've seen it evolve and
Let's
expand.
see, how long do you have?
I know. How much? Is this till tomorrow? Yeah, exactly. I mean, my list. We probably have the same list, but I'll just name one thing, but which we've kind of referenced earlier. But you know, everything at NATO has to be done by consensus, and getting 32 nations every day to agree on any decision that the alliance takes. It takes your breath away some days, and you get into these same debates and arguments over and over again. And there were many days when I was sitting exactly where Kay did, behind the United States, you know, placard there at the big round table with all the allies. And I kept thinking to myself, what would this be like if we had majority rule? What would this be like? We'd get so much work done. So I think you do have to ask yourself, look, when the alliance was created 75 years ago, I was just a handful of countries, you know, around the table. And now that it's 32, you really have to ask yourself if that consensus rule is fit for purpose. So that'd be mine. Maybe you have others you want to, but you probably had your moments with consensus too.
You took the absolute words out of my mouth. That would have been the first thing. But what I would do, in addition to that, I think there should at least be a minority report that up to 2 or say up to 4 countries could have a minority report, but it wouldn't keep the really will of the body from doing what needed to be done. Because what happens is several countries will have a parochial interest in something, and they'll hold out for that parochial interest. And so it need some amendment. The other thing I would do, if I were going to change it, I would look toward the evolution of the other global partners that we want. My personal view is that dealing with China we need to bring the largest economies of the world together in concert to hold China from stealing our technology or doing the things that China does, taking away our rights of privacy, of the proprietary information. We need the economies of the world because China can't stand domestic turmoil because there's not investment and jobs. So if we have our partners in security all with us, and we have to plan for that, I think that's going to be our best deterrence to having a real tension come out into all-out war with China. So to do that, I would create a new level of partnership. Right now, the 4 Asia-Pacific partners are sort of a uber level. Actually, Sweden and Finland used to be in that uber level. Now I think the 4 Asia-Pacific partners are, although South Korea has been changing governments quite a bit, some of which are pro-America, some of which are wanting to have rapprochement with North Korea, which could jeopardize then some of the things that the other Asia-Pacific partners want to do. So we'd have to be very careful on trusted partners, but I think a higher level of partnership with countries that can really add something, like Australia, Japan, would be helpful. And I think we could also do that, and we need to have more in South America. Our own hemisphere should have partnerships in that hemisphere for our security. We started working on that some, and I think, Julie, you can update even on that, but Argentina has wanted to do more with NATO. They had a choice when Julie was there. She can tell you more about it, but they were trying to choose getting fighter jets, and they were trying to choose between F-16s and Chinese fighter jets. And thank heavens, Malay, the president, got in and stopped the purchasing from China and is purchasing from America. They also want to ascend into NATO. Colombia is in NATO, and we need to foster that. These countries are not necessarily ready to be in NATO, but we need those partnerships to be strengthened, and I think by reaching out into South America, we could have a stronger hemisphere, a stronger job and economy capability by being focused on doing more with South America. And then I think you have in the Middle East, we already have partners. I think that's building with the Abraham Accords, and I think that's good. If we could have a Middle East that we didn't have to worry about Iran, that would take one of the major irritants to our security away. And I think that might be in process. It's not there yet, but having all of the Arab nations surrounding the Gaza Strip was very promising. And if that can continue, and if there can be a 2-state solution there with Israel and the Palestinians, that could be a beginning of having then all the other countries that are not in the Abraham Accords to join in and have a more peaceful Middle East. That would be a huge help for our defense initiatives, because we've still got to be looking at Russia and China. So that's what I would do for changes. I think so much of what NATO does works well, and I think the founders that did that, which included, as you know, the President Truman and the people after World War II, but Vandenberg in the Senate, he wrote a book about Vandenberg that was very important because he was the Republican who was the Senate chairman of foreign affairs, and he went from being an isolationist to supporting Truman in forming NATO. And that was a huge, really bridge that has still remained in the Senate of bipartisan support for NATO and for our efforts at being the leader of the free world.
I know pretty soon we want to welcome some questions from the audience, but just, I thought I knew something about NATO, but until a few months ago, I never heard of something called the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And I know you've both been involved with that, and other people here may be way ahead of me, but I wondered if you could tell us what that is.
Do you want to talk about it?
You go ahead.
Okay.
I'm talking.
So we have the NATO alliance with the 32 members. We have the partners. You just heard about some of the partners. We have partners in the Indo-Pacific, partners in Latin America, like Colombia or Jordan in the Middle East. And then we have this other body, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which is groups of members of Congress or parliamentarians from all the NATO member states that regularly meet to issue statements, try and pursue research, make recommendations to NATO allies through the ambassadors. And it is a very important body. Most people don't know that it exists, but it's important because it's about sustaining public support for the alliance and having representatives from our parliamentarians or members of Congress to stay active in alliance affairs. What's interesting, fun fact about the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is they do operate by majority. And so they often come to NATO and say, you know, we just had a meeting. We agreed that we've got to do more on X. Why don't you guys get your act together and move out and get this done? And we say, well, because we've got 2 or 3 allies that just aren't there yet. And they said, well, we agreed. And I remind them, yeah, it's majority vote. It's not by consensus. Anyways, it is an important body. It's important for these countries to come together, not just as ambassadors around the table or as military commanders or working together at a lower level, but working through the people and the representatives of the people to talk about how public opinion is shifting and shaping NATO and NATO policies.
Thank you. You know, with the getting some questions from the audience, and somebody asked, and this goes back maybe to the polarization and some of the issues we have today, is it legal for any administration to declare non-enforcement of an international treaty? I guess that would mean not responding
Well,
to
that
it.
goes to the Senate. Yeah, it is.
Well, it depends on if we signed on for the treaty.
Yeah.
You know, because we don't sign all these international treaties. And our American presidents, Republicans and Democrats, have been very careful not to sign international treaties because we are going to keep our sovereignty and we're not going to turn it over to an international body. So if we signed a treaty, then if we were going to do something against that, then it would take really 2/3 vote of the Senate to ratify a change. It takes 2/3 vote of the Senate to ratify a treaty. And, you know, at one point in the Trump first administration, Trump would say something about withdrawing from NATO. Well, there's no mechanism, really. There's no mechanism, going back to your other question about what would you change, there's no mechanism to kick somebody out of NATO, even if they're holding things up, which is why you need that release valve. But the Congress passed a bill in the Biden administration, and it was overwhelmingly passed with Republicans and Democrats, and President Biden signed it.
With Marco Rubio leading the way.
Yeah, that no president can withdraw from NATO without 2/3 vote of the Senate,
yeah.
or majority of both houses. So, so that you, in any international treaty, you're going to have to, if we signed it. But as I said, we haven't signed too many of them.
How do each of you foresee the Ukrainian situation ending?
Easy question. So, I mean, what's clear to me is that President Zelensky has traveled quite a distance throughout the war. When we were working with President Zelensky, he was definitely of the mind that Ukraine was capable of getting back all of its territory. Russia holds about 20% of Ukraine's territory right now. And of course, he went in Crimea in 2014 and grabbed that, and then additional territory when the war started in 2022. President Zelensky now is in a very different headspace. I think he understands that there could be a world in which Ukraine will lose that territory, possibly as part of a ceasefire and then some sort of political settlement. I think he is willing to come to the table to negotiate with President Putin. He was willing in the Biden administration. The problem is Russia had no desire whatsoever to negotiate, minus the couple of weeks right after the war started when Ukrainians and Russians were negotiating. There was really no outreach or nibbling on the part of the Russian side to express an interest. We had sent a couple flags up to see, who would salute throughout the Biden years, and Russia was just absolutely not interested. Now, I think President Trump genuinely wants to end the war. I think, however, I would disagree with his approach. I think he has thought that he could somehow make this happen by just getting everybody. He would meet with Putin in Alaska and then meet with Zelensky repeatedly and almost kind of badger him into this. But Alaska produced nothing whatsoever. Putin walked away with more time on the clock and then just increased his attacks on Ukrainian civilians and critical infrastructure. And they don't just kill Ukrainian soldiers, they go after the Ukrainian people, unlike the Ukrainian soldiers who just fight Russian soldiers. But we had a major development in the last couple of days, and that is that I think President Trump realized that Alaska didn't produce the result that he was seeking. I think he's frustrated with Putin. He should be frustrated with Putin because Putin's playing him, and really knows what he's doing. And so the president decided to then move forward with sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, the two biggest oil companies in Russia, and I salute that. I think it was exactly what needed to happen. I think President Trump could end the war in Ukraine if he were to apply sustained pressure on Moscow. But it's very hard to predict from one week to the next where the president's policy on Ukraine is. And it varies. We've seen him issue warnings to Moscow. You have 2 weeks. Time comes and goes. You have 2 more weeks. You have 2 more weeks. We have 100 days. We have 24 hours. You never know. So my hope is that the president is fed up and he will stay frustrated with Putin. He will tighten the screws. He will encourage Congress to move forward with secondary sanctions, all sorts of other ideas. And if he were to send the Tomahawks to Ukraine, something I support, I think Putin would get the message very quickly that the U.S. is prepared to support Ukraine until Putin gets to the negotiating table, and that we will apply pressure on Moscow until that happens, and we will support Ukraine until that happens. And I think the stars could align within the next year for this to happen, but it requires the president to stay the course. So it's an open-ended question in my mind, and I hope that we see an end to this awful war in the coming months.
Yes, I think your question was, what do we think will be the end? And I think that clearly it has taken too long for the president to really see Putin for what he is. And he didn't believe, I think, that Putin would go back on his word, that he would play him so publicly as he did in Alaska. And I think he is fed up now. And I think that I believe that we will begin to see movement. I think it is important that the president stick with these sanctions. I think that the original thought of giving Zelensky the tomahawks was right. I think it's time. Ukraine's been a sitting duck for 3 years, just getting incoming, losing civilians as well as his own military. And it's time to have an offense capability for Ukraine. And it appears that Putin is holding out, trying to get that last piece of Donetsk, which is the key corridor that he wants to be able to go into Kyiv. He still wants this, what he's after. And I think the president has been clear, Marco Rubio has been clear, that they're not going to get what they haven't already taken. But I think the chances are that much of what they've already taken will stay in a zone that will probably be a neutral zone where there will be a zone of where there are security forces that will be European, but with our support, that will just be a stalemate for a long time. But eventually, the hope would be that the Ukrainians would, at some point, be able to be a full country by its original boundaries, unlike Georgia, which we protested when Putin did this in Georgia, took the 2 provinces in Georgia, but we didn't do anything. And so Russia just put up boundaries and started teaching the kids in Russian and issued passports that were Russian passports to the Georgia people. And now Russia has virtual control. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen with Ukraine. And it's important not just for this situation. It's important because President Xi in China is watching for his opportunity to make a run on Taiwan. And when we had the disastrous exit from Afghanistan, both Putin and Xi saw an opportunity for an America that was in disarray. And that, I think, led Putin into the march on Kyiv. And he is now counting on our losing interest. We are not going to lose interest, I hope. And it's going to be for doing the right thing and for showing Putin that he can't do this to a NATO nation or anybody else, but it's also part of our deterrence against China. And there's no mistake that she is watching everything we're not doing and wondering when is his right time. So it's not like we're just standing up for Ukraine. We're standing up for holding off Russia and holding off China from adversarial intentions on our NATO allies or on Indo-Pacific partners.
You talked earlier about the importance of the U.S. playing its leading role in the world. Are our schools doing enough to teach American kids about the importance of American leadership?
No, they are not. We are not producing American kids that know our history, know our uniqueness, know about the greatness of our country. And civics is not in our schools anymore.
Yeah.
Being a good neighbor, being a good citizen, what are the responsibilities of freedom? Freedom isn't free. We have to teach our kids about freedom and what we owe to our next generation to protect freedom. And our schools, I think we're getting the message. I think we're seeing it now in colleges that are now saying, wait a minute, our schools haven't been teaching basics, the basics to be successful in the economy, the basics of patriotism, the basics of loving our country. And some kids don't even know the Pledge of Allegiance or the Star Spangled Banner. And that we can't keep going like that.
Agree. Yeah. 100%. Civics, I mean, it's just a huge gaping hole in the education system right now. And I think we're living the result of that right now.
I'd like to see a show of hands out here. Do you think our schools are doing enough to create great citizens? Raise your hand if you think that we are.
Yeah.
One. Well, we're here for discourse.
Yeah.
Meet us in the back of the room.
Well, speaking of discourse, so you've both talked about being around that table with 30 or 32 members. And someone asked, are there non-military issues that are ever discussed during NATO meetings?
Oh, all the time. I mean, it's a political alliance and it's a military alliance. And there's a separate military committee that meets with all the heads of the military delegations. So each mission has a separate team of folks in uniform. And so they're meeting regularly to get deeper in the weeds on military issues. But I mean, you'd be amazed what we talk about on a weekly basis. We met multiple times a week, and then we meet at lower levels and in committees as well. So there's 4,000 people working in the alliance. There's just work churning all the time in groups, small groups, 32 allied groups. We meet, sometimes as the Quad. I guess we're not supposed to admit that, but the United States, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. I mean, we meet separately as the larger powers in the alliance, often to just understand each other's viewpoints. But you can discuss in the alliance, on a Monday, the Indo-Pacific partners and what more we can do with them, to cybersecurity attacks, to the impact of climate on conflict and climate security issues. You can talk about women, peace, and security. We have meetings on flashpoints in the Western Balkans. We talk about the Arctic, and then we talk about our adversaries, the Iranians, the North Koreans in some cases, especially once they sent troops into Russia to fight in Ukraine. We talk constantly about the Russians. We're getting intelligence briefings. So no 2 days are the same. And as ambassador, you're meeting with allies, but we travel a lot to allied nations to meet with their governments. We go out and speak to different audiences about the importance. And then really, my experience was, there was the challenge of talking to the allies about a variety of political and military issues, but there's also fighting with and arguing with your own colleagues back home, and you spend half of your time trying to get the US government aligned on one viewpoint, and then you have to bring it into the alliance and try and get the allies to agree with whatever perspective you may have. So it felt many weeks like a three-ring circus, but yes, the short answer is it's a variety of non-military, military, political, economic issues, because in today's environment, security is defined in such broad terms that, NATO was built for just tanks rolling across borders. But today, NATO's dealing with those 20 drones that flew into Polish airspace, an undersea cable that's cut in the Baltic Sea, a cyber attack in Estonia, or something happening up in the Arctic, or a disinformation campaign that says that NATO started the war in Ukraine. So you're dealing with all sorts of new definitions of security from day to day.
Yes, I would say it's usually, though, it's security related
Yes.
issues, but they're not issues of hardware. I think what you're saying, and when I was there, 2018, 19, and 20, we were making plans to help every one of us on COVID. And that NATO did so much in COVID, and that was truly alliance-wide, getting all of what we had. There were no vaccines, and we went to Brussels shut down. There were no restaurants. The malls were closed. No restaurants, no bars. Nothing except grocery stores were open. And there were no vaccines, and yet we all came to work, and we worked every day, trying to see how we could transport all that was needed for the hospitals to treat in the best way that we could the COVID victims, and also to give what we could in information about what you had to do with sanitizing things and all of that. So we did a lot of that just for our public safety, and it was quite remarkable. I didn't get a COVID shot until about April of 2021 because there was nothing over there.
Well, and that ties in with that whole question of when we talk about security. Maybe you talk about the reduction of U.S. soft power with the USAIDs closing and other things that are happening, and how that affects our national security and the NATO order.
Yeah, COVID was a big example of soft power because we all shared what we had, and NATO used airplanes to get things out, and we didn't ask, who was contributing more than somebody else. Everybody was in it together, and so I think that's where NATO functioned very well in a kind of an out of non-operation effort. And I think soft power is important, and I think what Julie was saying earlier about USAID did some very good things. There were examples of where they'd gone awry, but I think our soft power has been very helpful in our leadership of the world. And I was on the NASA Advisory Council, and with Bill Nelson, the administrator at the time, we did some wonderful soft power, going to South American countries and talking about what they could do with NASA satellites, and looking at their crops and when would be the best time to harvest or to plant. And we have assets that we can use for soft power, and I think that was an effective use of what we had that could help them do the right things for their crops and their economies. And I think we can do that with NATO or some of our other diplomatic teams.
I worry a lot about American soft power right now. I think we're losing it in real time, some of it, and I think it's very important. Our military is the best in the world, world class, and very proud of our military, and it was such an honor to work alongside people in uniform at NATO. But soft power is equally important, and it's the quality of our universities, our ability to attract international researchers and scientists. That trend is reversing itself right now, and frankly, our friends in Europe are attracting some of the scientists that wanted to come to the United States. USAID, far from perfect, but played a huge role in helping countries around the world stabilize. That power is gone, and in large part has just completely disappeared, and our culture, Hollywood, our technology, Silicon Valley, world-class technology. I mean, we still have elements of these strengths, but something is changing. And when you're out in the world right now, you hear these mutterings of, you know, what's happening with America? You were this beacon for democracy and the rule of law and human rights, and you stood up for the little kids on the block and pushed back against bullies, and you're spending a lot of time arguing with each other, and you're rolling back some of your greatest strengths, and folks are worried about us. I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago, and there are concerns out there about what is happening inside of this country right now, and whether or not, without even realizing it, we're shedding some of those strengths. Our network of allies and partners, the appreciation of working with our friends around the world, respect and the draw of world-class scientists and, again, researchers, our assistance, humanitarian assistance around the world. So I hope that doesn't become the trend. I hope we maintain that soft power, because when you combine American military power, hard power, with soft power, nothing can beat it. China can't compete with that. Russia can't compete with it. And we really have to maintain those two elements of American power, in my mind.
Thank you. Well, on that note, as we wrap up, I don't know if it's appropriate to say fraternity or sorority of former ambassadors to NATO, but I imagine there's a lot of, the two of you passed the baton, but in other cases, are you still in touch with other former ambassadors, and you're all probably consulting with the current ambassador? What does that look like?
Well, I definitely am keeping up with former colleagues. They're now in other places where we talk about what they're doing. One is ambassador to France, one is ambassador to Australia, one is ambassador to India. I went to Saudi Arabia last year, and one of my colleagues from NATO was ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And it's just wonderful to have that kind of diaspora of friends that are so knowledgeable about what's going on and what's current. And their ambassadors, I have found, are very steeped in history. They know the communities where they are serving, and so I have kept up with a lot of them. And I was in Berlin last week in a conference, giving a European conference. I was on the program, and the former German ambassador to NATO with me came and stayed for my presentation, and then we went to dinner. It was just wonderful to have those kinds of friends that you make. And when, as Julie knows, when you are going through all these tough times together, whatever problems we were facing, it's kind of a bonding. So you work together, and you try to do the best for getting us all forward. And it was a wonderful experience. A surprise to me, because, as I said, I've been in the Senate for 20 years, and I was used to Senate speak. And so getting used to Diplo speak was a whole new world for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've stayed in touch with the ambassadors that I worked with. Some are still there because I just left late last year, and then I've also stayed in touch with former U.S. ambassadors of different administrations. I think we're all in a little club, and we care about the alliance. We want to help the next NATO ambassador succeed, and whoever comes after Matt Whitaker, who's currently in the chair, he'll join the club when he's done. And it is nice we all share that collective experience. We can share our experiences. All the American ambassadors lived in the same house, and so we tell stories, as we just were, about what it was like living in Brussels and all that rain. And it's a club I'm proud to be a part of.
Well, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us to say we're lucky to be invited to share some glimpses of your club and to thank you for the great work you do. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Hauenstein Center, we want to thank you again for coming out tonight. If you're like me, you might feel a little bit heartened by hearing people from different administrations and different sides of the aisles talking in tandem about how we move the world forward. So we hope you take that spirit with you as you head into the exhibition hall. Please stay for coffee and dessert. Build some alliances of your own while you're out there. And let's figure out how to keep the community moving forward together. Thank you.